Welcome to Chapter 16.5, The Age of Absolutism, Absolute Monarchy in Russia. In the 1600s, Russia was isolated from Western Europe and had remained a medieval state, but it was not until the end of that century that a new Tsar, Peter the Great, transformed Russia into a leading power. So to modernize Russia, Peter began a new policy of westernization. He adopted Western ideas, technology, and culture. Many of his subjects resisted this change, but to enforce his new policy, Peter became an autocratic monarch, or one who rules with unlimited authority. All the Russian institutions were under Peter the Great's control, and he executed anybody who resisted his new order. He forced the boyars, or the land-owning nobles, to serve the state in civilian or military positions. Peter also stipulated that they shave their beards and wear Western-style clothing. Peter pushed through social and economic reforms. He also increased Russia's military power and extended its borders. However, Russia still needed a warm water port. This would increase Russia's trade with the West. But the nearest port of this kind to Russia was the Black Sea, but Peter couldn't defeat the Ottoman Empire, which controlled that region. Determined to expand Russia's territory, Peter also waged a long war against Sweden to win territory along the Baltic Sea. And on this territory, he built a new capital city called St. Petersburg. It became the symbol of modern Russia. When Peter died in 1725, he had left a mixed legacy, because although he had modernized Russia, he had used terror to enforce his absolute power. In 1762, Catherine the Great came to power and was also an absolute monarch. She followed Peter's lead in embracing Western ideas and expanding Russia's borders. She was an efficient and energetic empress, and under her rule, laws were codified and state-supported education began for both boys and girls. But after waging war, she defeated the Ottoman Empire and finally won the warm water port on the Black Sea that Peter the Great had dreamed of. In the 1770s, Russia, Prussia, and Austria each wanted a part of Poland as their own territory. In order to avoid war, the three kingdoms agreed to partition or divide up Poland. And in 1772, Russia gained part of the eastern part of Poland, which Prussia and Austria took over the western part of Poland, and Poland vanished as a political entity. If we're going to talk about Peter the Great, we actually have to go back a couple of years before to another ruler named Ivan the Terrible. Ivan the Terrible became king of Russia in 1533, but he had problems with his noblemen who are called boyars. He wanted to control the territory that they also controlled. So he decided to just seize them, kill them, and take their land. That was the easiest way. He was very violent, and this is part of the reason why he was named Ivan the Terrible. But he was convinced that people were conspiring against him, and so he started to create a secret police, and they are the original Men in Black. They were a very scary bunch of guys, and would assassinate and eavesdrop, and all kinds of stuff for their king. In 1581, he killed his own son in a rage because his son was not doing what he wanted him to do. And this caused him to descend into mental illness and dejection. And eventually, Russia grew to be very chaotic, and it had a lot of economic problems. And he died without any heir to the throne. So the noblemen looked around for a new king, and they chose a son from his first marriage. The wife of that marriage had the last name Romanov, and Michael Romanov was the son that inherited the throne. And he himself is not extremely memorable, but it began the dynasty, the Romanov dynasty, which became one of the longest-lasting European dynasties, and it ended in 1917 when the Russian Revolution deposed their king. Well, Peter the Great comes to power about 70 years after Ivan the Terrible, and he inherits the throne in 1682. as when he is still just a small child. His older sister becomes regent and rules for him and looks for opportunities to assassinate him. But he manages to survive until and at the age of 17, he decides that he's ready to take control of his empire himself, and so he has his sister basically put into a nunnery, and he becomes the ruler of his territory. Well, and he always had a fascination with the West. He wanted to westernize Russia. But there's a big problem because Russia is culturally and religiously extremely different from the rest of Europe. Culturally, Russia is Orthodox, where the rest of the Europe is either Catholic or Protestant. So he began to unify his country and to westernize his country. He took the Orthodox Church and put it under state control, which did not please the Orthodox church leaders at all. He also reduced the power of the landowners. He modernized the army, and he brought in European officers to help train his soldiers. He also introduced the potato, which had just recently come to Europe, and it helped to save a lot of his subjects from starvation. He started Russia's first newspaper, and he raised women's status in society. He forced the adoption of Western fashion, and he also forced his boyars to cut off their beards, which he felt were a sign of their Eastern orientedness, and so he wanted them to be as Western as possible, and he made them wear European clothing, which made them very unhappy. If any of you have ever thought of being forced to wear a uniform, you now know even the boyars resisted that. Well, in 1697, he took a trip to the West incognito, which probably meant that everybody knew who he was, but they were told to pretend that he wasn't, that he was just some ordinary guy. And he went to go visit Holland to learn how they built their ships. He was really fascinated with that. He also took a trip to other places in Europe, recruiting Europeans to come to Russia and help to develop their infrastructure and their industry. He ended up hiring about 700 European craftsmen to come and build him a fleet of ships. And he also, as he was touring Europe, he had to cut his trip short because rebellion had started in Russia, and so he went back and brutally beat down all the people who were rebelling, like a good autocratic emperor. Yes. So the problem was that Russia really needed a warm water port. That means that they needed a place that would not freeze over during the winter. And unfortunately, going south, there is the Black Sea, which eventually opens up into the Mediterranean. But the Ottoman Empire was firmly in control of that area. And so instead, Peter looks to the west, and there's a territory that was ruled by Sweden at that point. So he fought with Sweden and won a port in the Baltic Sea. And then he founded a city on that coastline, which is today called St. Petersburg. He founded it in 1703. Peter wasn't afraid to use force to reach his goals, and if anybody revolted against him, they were dead. So he also adopted mercantilistic policies to help pay for all of these reforms, and he imported technology and improved schools, and he improved canals, and he developed new industries. He was interested in reforming social as well as economic problems within Russia. He also tried to expand Russia's border. So he ended up building a huge army in Europe, as well as a world-class navy. And Peter was not able to push through the Ottoman Empire to get his warm water port to the south. But by the end of the 18th century, Catherine the Great would finally achieve this goal. So Peter started a war with Sweden in 1700, and he defeated the Swedes in 1709 and gained the territory along the Black Sea area. So if you are looking on the map here, this is the Baltic Sea, and he pushed Sweden out of this area and developed his own city right there, which he named St. Petersburg. And it rivaled any other European city. it became a symbol of Peter's goal to modernize Russia. And during this time, Russia also expanded eastward. Peter signed a treaty with China that recognized Russia's claims to the land north of China. He hired a guy named Vitus Bering to explore the straits between Siberia and Alaska. And then these expansions made Russia the world's largest country, and it has remained so even to today. Peter the Great has left a mixed legacy for Russia. On the positive side, he ended Russia's isolation. He expanded Russia's territory and he gained ports on the Baltic Sea. He also built a huge military. On the negative side, though, his reforms died with him because nobody was really interested in changing that quickly. Number 2, he used a lot of terror to enforce his will. And number 3, the policies that he used led to a growth in the medieval idea of serfdom. Well, Catherine the Great was not really Russian. She was actually a German princess who had married Peter the Great's grandson, who was a bit of a lump. Peter III, who was the grandson of Peter the Great, was basically incompetent and weak. But she was kind of the opposite. So when they got married, it was an arranged marriage, and it was Peter III's mother who had arranged the marriage and really liked Catherine the Great, and so got Catherine the Great to come and marry her son. And Catherine eventually had her son arrested and murdered. Had her husband, arrested and murdered, and she was able to seize power in her own right. And she was very hardworking and ambitious. She was very capable. But she was also openly immoral, which really shocked the rest of Europe. But that's kind of a double standard, because the kings of Europe were just like that. And so why were they judging her differently? She treated the peasants very harshly, and there were several uprisings, but they were savagely put down. And the nobles, who were also part of the uprising, were exiled to Siberia. If you were a peasant, though, you had the bad luck of just getting killed straight out. Or maybe that was the good luck, because Siberia would not have been a pleasant place to go hang out. But she also encouraged government censorship. But the strange, interesting difference was that she also encouraged education. I don't understand. But she removed trade restrictions, and she promoted the arts and sciences. She was a bit self-educated. She actually converted to Orthodox Christianity from her Catholic background, and she learned the Russian language all on her own. And then she decided that she wanted to become more self-educated, so she just kept continuing to read and read and read. And she carried on a huge correspondence with other Enlightenment thinkers in France and other places around the world. So in some ways she was very well educated, but in other ways some would call her an enlightened dictator or enlightened monarch. But she also continued to really want to stay in control and in power, so she restricted the freedoms of her subjects. She went to war against Poland, and she divided it with her allies, who were Prussia and Austria. The reason why she felt like she had justification to attack Poland was that they had been rebelling against Russian influence or Russian finagling, and so she ended up taking over half of Poland's territory. Catherine proved to be an effective and able absolute monarch. She embraced Western ideas, she reorganized the government and codified the laws, which up till then had simply been based on the whim of the Tsar. She also opened up state-sponsored schools for children. But she could also be extremely ruthless. When peasants revolted, she put them down extremely harshly. Along with King Frederick II and Emperor Joseph II of Austria, Catherine partitioned Poland so that she got half of it, and this basically got rid of Poland. So by 1772, Poland was no longer its own country.